good evening or good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Hello to everyone joining us from wherever you are. This is the 6th session of the Inspire Education Summit. I'm Alex O'Neill, the host of the Limitless Changemakers podcast, and I will also be your host for this evening's summit session. This event really has been a fully international event. I have met people so far from my home country in the UK, the Netherlands, Slovakia, the US, Canada, China, Australia, South Africa, Sri Lanka, to name just a few. It's absolutely wonderful to think that we are all here because of a conjoined desire to make a change, to see something different for the future of our young people and our society. Years ago, after watching Sir Ken Robinson's famous TED Talk on education, my mind was alight and I wanted so badly to do something to make a difference in schools. It took years of trying different avenues for me to find something that I loved and that fit with the life I wanted, which turned out to be interviewing guests on my podcast and bringing their expertise, their energy, their passion to others to inspire them to make change. A big part of my motivation and inspiration for this came from meeting others who felt the same way as me and was as passionate as I was. Suddenly, I knew I wasn't alone and I had all these wonderful people to collaborate with. When I met Jo Symes from Progressive Education and did some live interviews in her Facebook group, we wanted to spread this connection even wider. That is why we have brought you all together for this summit. This is why we have a networking opportunity at the end of each session. And it's also why Jo and I are launching a brand new membership community next Monday, the 25th of November, at our final summit session for anyone who wants to set up their own school or learning community and does not want to do it alone. Come join us at the session on Monday at 7:30 p.m. GMT to find out more about the opportunity, or you can watch your inboxes for more info next week when we send it out by email. Bringing community and connection is also something that I know is important to our guest speaker this evening. I'm extremely pleased to welcome to your screens Dr. James Mannion, who I have actually interviewed before and is a delightful and optimistic presence in the education system. When we spoke last, we talked about the importance of involving individuals from all areas of an organisation to implement successful change. Working together collaboratively results in success. James is the director of Rethinking Education, a teacher training organisation specialising in implementation and improvement science, self-regulated learning and practitioner inquiry. He is the host of the popular Rethinking Education podcast and brings people together in the Rethinking Education online network. He is a former teacher and school leader of 12 years and has an MA in person-centred education from the University of Sussex and a PhD in self-regulated learning from the University of Cambridge. James is an associate of Oracy, Cambridge, and a Bi-Fellow of Hughes Hall, University of Cambridge, and is the author of a number of books and resources, one of which we're giving away this evening, signed as a thank you for being here live tonight. So hang on to the end of the session and we will be giving that out. So without further ado, James, welcome.
Hello, thank you for that, Alex, and hello everybody. It's really lovely to be here. I am very grateful indeed for this invitation and quite in awe as somebody who has organized conferences before. I'd take my hat off. If I had a hat on, I would doff it in your direction, Alex and Jo. Thank you so much for pulling this together and for inviting me to share my thoughts with you all among such an illustrious cast as well of speakers throughout the week. So thank you all very much indeed. I've been told that I'm supposed to speak for a period of time and that then there'll be like a Q&A. But so Alex, is it possible to have more of an interactive thing, or is it that people can people unmute and chat? Like,
I can't at the moment. I could change that if you want.
We could check. Well, let's just leave it for now, and then when we when we get to that point, because I would quite like to make this as discursive as I can, because I'm an oracy guy. I'm all about dialogue, and otherwise it's a very one-sided conversation, isn't it? If somebody talks at you like in normal life for like 45 minutes, you're like, dude, have a breath. So I would like to try, if I can, to make this more interactive and to invite some contributions from viewers. Thank you, Sylvie, for the little heart there. We'll try to make it interactive. I'm not here to preach. I'm here to sort of to think out loud and to hopefully have my questions, my ideas questioned, challenged, perhaps forged in the furnace of fiery discussion, if that's not too grand. So, speaking of grand, the strap line of this conference is, if you could design a new paradigm of education, what would it look like? And it's like, that's quite a bold thing, isn't it? New paradigm of education. And there's something really interesting about that as an idea. Like schools, it seems to me, are just like a fundamentally good idea. Education is a fundamentally good idea. And if it didn't exist, if schools didn't exist, if alternative learning providers didn't exist, you'd invent them, wouldn't you? It just seems like such a good idea to have these places where young people can go and learn about the world from caring, intelligent, sort of well-qualified adults in safe environment. They can make friends, they can gain qualifications, go off into the world and take it by the scruff of the neck. Like, what's not to like? It seems like such a good idea, doesn't it? And then when you zoom in on like what's going on in our schools, it's quite easy to notice that all is not well, right? And there's quite a lot of issues which are very well rehearsed, and we don't need to go into them here. But things like the fact that lots of children leave school feeling like a failure. There's a huge attendance crisis, not just in this country, but seemingly in every country in the world that I've looked at so far. Mental health crisis, teacher retention. There are all kinds of issues. And somebody with a handier turn of phrase than me described it as the education system as being like a wish in a fairy tale that's gone horribly wrong, which really struck me when I first came across it and thought, yeah, there's something in that. It does feel like it's this really good idea, and yet we're somehow sort of, it's causing all these problems, and people are really stressed out and unhappy, and what's happening there? And then the more I think about that, the more I think that's actually quite an unfair characterization. I think I work in schools. I worked in schools for many years, for 12 or 14 years or so. And I work in schools now. I often visit schools and I work with teachers and school leaders. And I love being in schools. And I always leave feeling uplifted. And I think that above all, schools of whichever stripe they are, they're places of human connection, aren't they? And human growth and flourishing, certainly when they're at their best. And human connection is the most nourishing thing of all, isn't it? And so there's lots that's right, I think, as well as there being lots of room for improvement. And I want to be really quite clear about that. Like sometimes you hear people say things like, "Oh, we just need to tear it all up and start again," and I really don't think that we do. I think that there's a lot that of hard-won stuff that we really need to keep hold of, and so I'm very interested in bringing about system reform, but not in terms of sort of getting rid of things that are already there, but in terms of augmenting and improving and moving towards like marginal gains, if you like, that sort of stack up and interact and add up to a bigger effect overall. And the good news, I think, is that it really won't take that much to get from where we are to where we want to be. Rather than thinking, if I was trying to build utopia, I wouldn't start from here. I actually think I would absolutely start from here. We've got all this infrastructure in place. We've got the wind at our backs. Like we can actually. I don't think that it will take very much to change course and put things on a much more of a footing where it's all about human flourishing, and where every child and young person wants to go to school. They feel like they belong there. They're happy there, and they and adults alike. And so perhaps the first radical thing that I'll say this evening is that I don't think that there's all that much wrong in some sense. I don't think that we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have this amazing, really quite diverse education system in this country. You know, there are lots of different types of schools. There's alternative learning providers. There are homeschooling communities. I would like to see far greater diversity, but I think that we're in a good starting place. And I think it's also important to recognize that that the problems that we face are nearly all like what's that phrase, that the path to hell is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You know, out of the desire to get every child to become literate and numerate, to close disadvantage gaps, to insist on high standards of behavior, of learning. It's all coming from a good place. You know, people want the best for children and young people. But I think that because it's so heightened, like our children, it's such a heightened thing, we impose all of this accountability stuff around it, and that's where it starts to become really stressful. And I think that that's one area that we need to look at. So how can we change course and get ourselves pointing in a better direction? That's what we're here to discuss this evening, and indeed throughout this week. So about me, there are three things that I think that are relevant for you to know about me, about three aspects of education that I spend pretty much all my waking hours thinking about. It fires up often within about a minute. I often dream about education. I don't know if everybody else is like this. I'd be interested to hear this when we go to the interaction, but it's just like a constant stream in my head of thinking about this. So the first thing is that I'm super interested in what I now refer to as learner effectiveness. This goes by many names: learning to learn, self-regulated learning, self-directed learning, teaching children and young people, and indeed adults, how to become more effective learners, not just what to learn, but how to learn. And I was a teacher for many years in mainstream schools and later on in an alternative setting. And I was a science teacher, and I was quite thwarted as a science teacher because I found that there were some children, some young people who just were not up for talking about whatever it was that we were talking about that day, the periodic table or whatever it might be, the anatomy or something. They weren't really into that, and they weren't up for discussing it. And also they weren't very good at science. They kept doing assessments and getting told that they weren't very good at this. And so I was like trying to make them do something that they didn't want to do, and that was actually making them feel bad about themselves. And I found that it was just really unpleasant. I really struggled with that dynamic, and I was quite keen to get out of the science lab, because I found that those same kids, if you were teaching them in PSHE, say, and you were teaching them about something like animal rights or about bullying or about how money works or whatever, something else about the world or health or something, they would really come alive and they would be really up for having those kinds of discussions. Maybe because PSHE isn't assessed, but also because those things have often sort of got a moral dimension. There's a sense of right and wrong and fairness that so sort of it burns in young people, doesn't it? That intrinsic sense of fairness and unfairness. And so I was at a school where we started this learning to learn curriculum, and I soon realized that this was an amazing opportunity to do something really bold and different. I threw myself into it, and I did a PhD, which turned out to be an 8-year study of this learner effectiveness curriculum, learning to learn curriculum. And it had an incredible impact. To cut a very long story short, the kids who took part in this taught curriculum that we created for them, 400 lessons over a 3-year period, they went on to get the best results that school had ever seen by some margin. And it was especially beneficial for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. So the disadvantage gap closed from the bottom up, which was amazing. And that work started in 2010 for me, so 14 years ago, and it still is central to my work now. So for the last couple of years, I've been working closely with the Welsh government on a learner effectiveness initiative, and I'll share something of that in a little while. This framework that we've developed for how to think about learner effectiveness, which I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on. So that's thing number one, is learner effectiveness. I think is really important. We need to teach people how to learn, not just what to learn. And if you look at a standard school timetable, it's like what, maths, English, geography, music, drama. It's like just the curriculum. It's all about the what, not about the how. So I'm all about the how. The second thing is that I'm super interested in system level reform, as well as helping schools to improve, for example, through learner effectiveness. I'm really interested in system level reform. I did a master's many years ago in person-centered education, and that phrase really, the thinking that was central to that phrase, person-centered, it still drives my thinking to this day, as opposed to being school-centered, curriculum-centered. Like there are lots of schools in this country where people sort of say it feels a bit like it's not what can this school do for your child, but what can your child do to make our school look good. And for example, we see examples of schools and colleges where if a child doesn't look like they're going to get a top grade, they're cut from that course because otherwise it makes the school look bad. And that's just gone wrong, hasn't it? The tail's wagging the dog at that point. And so, as Alex mentioned, I host this podcast, the Rethinking Education podcast, which has been going for a number of years now. We've had about 500,000 plays or so, and I've learned a huge amount through that exercise, through speaking with lots of illustrious guests over the years. And so I'm really interested in that. And the third thing is around change management. So 10 years ago, I attended a conference about something called implementation science, which is a health discipline. It's a small little niche discipline that's sort of attached to the side of the healthcare medicine world, which is about essentially scaling up good practice, taking ideas that work and then figuring out how to implement them at scale so that they become part of routine use. And it was just that my attendance at that conference that day was like jaw on the floor. Oh my goodness, this is what education needs more than anything. Is like, how can we actually implement these ideas? We've got loads of really good ideas, but they're often just being implemented badly. How can we implement these ideas well? And I have a book coming out in January that's about that. The book's called Making Change Stick, a title that was kindly suggested to me by the late, great Sir Tim Brighouse. And I'll talk a little bit about that stuff later on as well, about implementation science. So like, how can we actually implement change, not just at a school level, but at a system level? And I think that when this book comes out, I hope that you'll all find that I've done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of thinking about how to implement the changes that we all want to see. So I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on that as well. So that's some bits about me and the sort of the ideas that drive lots of my thinking and that will underpin what I'm going to go on to talk about in this session. So general principles, like it's very clear that things need to change. Like we don't need to labor that point. And I think that fundamentally the strongest argument for that is that there are so many people in the world who have wildly different views about education and what it's for and what they want out of it. And so we therefore need to have a much more diverse, responsive education system that can cater for more people's needs. We don't quite have a one-size-fits-all education system, but it is pretty one-size-fits-all. Certainly the state education system is very one-size-fits-all, and that's where most kids go. And so I think that we need more diversity, which is easier said than done, to say the least. And I do think that there needs to be a core offer within that. I don't think that you should just let it just go totally wild. There needs to be a core offer, and I think it looks broadly similar to what there currently is. But I just think that, when I talked about that timetable earlier, where there's 5 lessons a day for 5 lessons a week, and at the moment 25 lessons out of 25 are all about delivering content and testing on it. If we drop that down to 20 lessons out of 25, my ideal would be 15 lessons out of 25. So you would have 15, like 60% of the curriculum time essentially given over to subject learning as it is now, 20% on self-directed learning, on learner effectiveness stuff, and roughly 20% on like multidisciplinary learning, which is also, we probably don't have time to discuss that this evening, but that's so important, multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary learning. And in schools, everything is just partitioned off into subject-based silos, which is not how the world works. And it's useful to learn about individual subjects, but you also need practice at fitting them all together again, don't you? So, and lots more self-directed learning alongside instruction. I think that there's, very strong role for explicit instruction when it's called for. I'm not anti traditionalist teaching. I think that it plays an important role. I just don't think that it should be the only story. and I'll come back to explain why. There are many problems that we need to fix, which we've talked about. We don't need to go over that, but there was one that I didn't mention earlier. I've noticed that I nearly mentioned Derry, the 20% thing. Thank you for pointing that out, Wendy. Yeah, thank you, Derry. So 20% absolutely for self-directed learning, but I would go further than Derry and say another 20% for interdisciplinary. Yeah, so mental health crisis, the forgotten third, the fact that lots of kids don't read. There's been a few reports out recently, that includes university students, like just people just are not reading anywhere near like they were. And of course, wider issues around, especially the environment, environmental breakdown. We need to act fast on this stuff. So there are many problems that we need to fix within education, and then like using that as an engine for wider societal change, as Alex alluded to earlier. And there are some fundamental truths, I think, and I imagine that a number of speakers this week are going to be speaking about self-determination theory, this idea that we've known for a while now what makes the recipe for a healthy functioning human being. You need a bit of autonomy, like public service announcement. People really need to have a small amount of say over what they do, when and how. People don't like being told what to do, even when it's a good idea, or maybe especially when it's a good idea. You see that in young children, don't you? When you sort of put their shoes on like a 2 or 3 year old, and they're like, "No, I want to do it," and that continues into adult life. And very important, people need to have some say over what they learn, when, how. And at the moment, there's far too little of that. Everything is very buttoned down in the mainstream education sector. This goes for teachers as well as for children and young people. Relatedness, I think about that on 3 levels. Like, first of all, how do you relate to yourself? Like, do you have lots of negative self-talk? Do you beat yourself up a lot? Or do you maybe give yourself too easy a ride? How do you relate to others? And how do you also relate to the wider world at a number of societies, family, village, town, whatever it might be, national level, international, intergalactic, perhaps. And competence, the third strand. People need to feel that they're good at stuff, that they can be good at something, that at least the thing that they're the least bad at this point in time. And the more things that we're good at, the better. And so we therefore need far more variety in the curriculum to give people more ways to succeed. And I was recently at the launch of a book. There's a brilliant book that came out recently that you may have seen, called Unfinished Business. It's a tribute to Sir Tim Brighouse, but it's also a sort of a call to action. I was very honored to be invited to write a short chapter for that book. I was at the launch, and somebody was saying that a phrase that Tim used a lot was success for all. Such a simple idea, isn't it? Success for all. We're a long way away from achieving that. I don't think that it would take that many tweaks to think about that. Let's backward design a system that delivers success for all, that is more sort of bottom up, and that helps every child and young person to celebrate their milestones and their successes in a way that grows up and out like a tree, rather than sort of filtering them out and telling them that they're rubbish at things. We need to just turn that on its head, but I don't think it would be that hard to do. And so self-determination theory, I think, provides a really neat template for how we should think about reforming the system. And so what does this look like in practice? There are three areas that I would like to look at. There are probably many more that we could talk about, but time is short. And I'll share the first one, and then we'll pause, and I'll invite people to sort of chip in, and then we'll do that for each of the 3 areas. So the first one is a very simple one, really, which is that idea about diversifying the offer and just creating many more types of schools. Like, there are lots of towns and cities in this country. I don't know whether this is mirrored. I'd love to hear from some of our international colleagues on the call here. There are some places where there's just like all the schools just look like carbon copies of each other, and there are often quite sort of strict academy type schools. The kids all wear little grey suits, and they get told off a lot, and they get like detentions for the slightest little thing. And some people really like that, right? Some teachers really like working in a school that's like that. Some kids seem to enjoy that kind of environment, and at least they say they do. Some parents really want that, and I don't think that we're going to be able to just wish that away, even though it's some, for many people it's really anathema, like to see those kinds of things. It's like, that's just wrong. But I don't think that we're going to win that battle. I don't think that we're going to eradicate to eradicate the existence of strict schools, and I don't think that we should do either. If people like that, that should be available. But alongside that, like, it's not okay for that to be the only thing, and for so many kids to be struggling because they can't succeed in that environment, and they get really anxious and stressed out. That's just not okay at all. And so alongside those more sort of standard schools, we need to have many more small scale schools. And I'm delighted to see this project that Joe and Alex are working on about helping people to create education startups and micro schools and self-directed learning communities. It's been done many times. If other people have done it, you can. And so I'd like to see much more of that, state funded. Also sort of larger scale schools that are just looser, just like less pressure about exams. Like, if you ask parents what do they want for their kids, they nearly always say, I want them to be happy, don't they? They don't say, I want to cram them for this, just for the sake of it at any cost. And so looser schools that don't have uniform is much more common elsewhere. It's probably quite weird for our international listeners and viewers to hear that, like, in the UK, it's like nearly every school the kids wear little grey suits. And I think that fundamentally that looks like in practice is just like having local planning, so that, like, there's much more of an idea of, like, what would be an appropriate ratio of small scale schools, of medium scale schools, of sort of looser, more extracurricular type schools, plus the cram schools, if you want to call it that, or the more strict type schools. You just need to have a bit of planning happening at the local level, at levels of towns and counties and what have you, just to make sure that there's a diverse offer so that people can find something that's more likely to meet their needs. That's number one, I think that needs to happen on a structural level. I'd be very interested to hear people's thoughts on that. So let's pause. And Alex, if you could unleash people's microphones from being muted. Thank you. If you would like to respond to that or to anything that I've said so far, please feel free to either raise your virtual hand or just unmute and start talking.
Shall I allow people to show their faces as well?
Yeah, why not? That would be nice.
Just bear in mind, everyone, this is being recorded, so if you come to the screen face, or if you choose to speak, then just bear that in mind.
Good stuff. Okay, thank you. So thank you. It's lovely to see some familiar faces appearing. Any thoughts on that idea of, like, diversify the offer? Is that too simple a thing to suggest? What do you think? I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts. Did you have a hand up there, Nicola?
I did have a hand up. Yeah, I mean, I've long thought this, that the problem I have in a rural area is there is only one offer, and that is mainstream school, and it didn't suit either of my kids, so I had to homeschool them, and that's been quite rural and isolated. And I've just really longed for a non-fee paying alternative provision, whether it was within 20 miles drive or 50 miles drive or whatever the distance, but not 50. But you know what I mean? It's like you usually have to pay for the privilege of having something that isn't straight down the line mainstream. And if it doesn't suit your kids, you're kind of screwed. So, I'm very much along with what you say. It should be non-fee paying, ideally.
Yeah, of course it should. Thank you for that. And what an amazing dog you have there in the background.
Of course, yeah, I'm babysitting. I've got 4 dogs on the sofa with me.
Oh my goodness.
Dog sitting.
I think we're gonna struggle to get the conversation back to education. I think everyone just wants to see your dogs now.
Yes.
Thank you for that. And obviously, like, the rural issue is where that idea of diversification meets just the reality of geography.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you, Sophie, and then Derry.
I think that's a really interesting point about geography, and also about the privilege of having money to not just pay for the education that you think your child deserves, but also to be able to get there. So I think it's an amazing idea to have a diversified offer, but it, I still think there's problems there because it's a privileged position to be able to get in a car and drive your child to a provision that isn't in your local village or in your local town. So there's quite a lot of considerations there. We've made choices to educate our children out of authority, and the onus is on us, obviously, to get them there and back. And that's a huge commitment when you're working, and the cost is huge. And I suppose unless there's like a huge shake-up of all social structures and better public transport links and everything, then there's a lot of different implications there. Obviously, fundamentally, I completely agree, and I think choice should be there, but it should be there for everybody, not just those that have the privilege of making that choice.
Yes, yeah, thank you. It's an excellent point. Thanks, Derry.
I always love the way you look for the positives, James. It creates a really non-negative atmosphere, which you've already done here. And of course, there are school systems where it's possible for parents to get state funding on a per capita basis to start their own school. I mean, you'll find that in Denmark, for example, and to a much lesser extent in the Netherlands. I think we tried to do it here with the sort of so-called free schools, but they're not free in terms of most people's understanding of the idea of freedom, are they?
No.
They're free schools which, yes, fit the ideas of a small group of people on the whole. Though I would accept there's some alternatives, aren't there, like the XP schools and Schools 21. It's happened to some extent here, so I can be a bit positive too, though I don't feel positive about the whole scene, I must say, because I think too many kids, James, are suffering too much, too much rigidity. And we've got to do something about it. But thanks for plugging the 20% for self-directed learning. I always appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it's such a great idea, and it's such a and it's succinct policy, isn't it? And it feels achievable. Wendy.
Thank you. I was just wondering, what if the diversity wasn't so much amongst schools as within schools?
Yeah.
I had a school that had 3 classes as I was growing up in the 70s, but you could have one class that was doing didactic, and one class that was doing like seemingly progressive, but have those different things so that children were able to actually choose or try out different, rather than it being split to three different classes. What if and that could easily be something that was then identified at an Ofsted type level, so that schools were actually appreciated for the diversity that they offer, for the children to try. Because it may be that one particular type of lesson you learn better in a different way. I started off with this split between behaviorism and progressive, but actually I think I've come to the point where I'm quite happy with behaviorism as long as it's not coercive. If you think that there's something that actually those ways of developing habits would be a really good way for you to learn, and it's not coercive, then what's the problem with that?
Yeah.
I mean, I might stop at a uniform, but
Right. Well, thank you for that, because you totally anticipated my next point, which is so the first point is about diversity at the level of schools. My next point, which I'll go on to, is about diversity within schools as well. So let's dive into that. Oh, did you want to come in back on that, Derek, quick?
Well, I was just going to say, Charlie Moreno Marrero has been on some of these calls. I don't think he's here now, but he started a school within a school in the Tallinn Arts High School in Estonia. Something like 60 kids, and parents and students could choose which part of the school they would go to, or at what time they would like to sort of transfer from the democratic part of the school, which was very democratic and self-directed. They could choose to move backwards and forwards between the 2 branches of the school. A very interesting experiment, and an organisation in Brussels called Quest has made a film about the school within a school at Tallinn. It's well worth watching. I expect you've seen it, James, but I just bring it to everyone else's. Perhaps Joe could put it in the chat.
Great, thank you for that, Derry. Okay, final point from Richard, and then we'll talk about diversity within schools.
Okay, thanks, James. And this is a little bit about diversity in schools. I ran something that was in between what Derry has done and what Charlie did with Subame. It was a program in a high school that allowed students to choose for one semester to go into a mixed age situation where they had considerably greater control over their learning. I put in chat a link to the write-up about that. It's operi.ca, which was the Ottawa Public Education Remake Initiative. That's where the OPERI comes from, trying to get the school board here to make change. And so far, no sign that they can continue to do that.
Right. Interesting. All right, thank you for that. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. I want to share with you something I mentioned earlier about learner effectiveness, and I want to share with you this model that I've been working with, the ship's wheel model, in this project that I've been doing with the Welsh government. And this is about thinking about learner effectiveness and recognizing that how multidimensional learner effectiveness is. But it's in some sense, this ship's wheel model, it's not even about just learning. It's not just about being an effective learner. It's like about being an effective human being, or just being a fully realized human being. So first of all, we have these wedges in the middle. So we have the physical domain, first of all, caring for your body. Like, are children and young people aware of like how to look after themselves? Are they getting enough sleep? The answer is often no. Do they know a great deal about nutrition and about how nutrition affects their mind and their mood and their body, blood sugar and so on? Often kids are pretty unaware of that stuff. Do they understand about how to get into their body, not just like, you know, doing PE lessons, but understanding like how to use their body and how to sort of get into your body to self-regulate, how to sort of wiggle your toes and just get into your body, how to use the breath and so on. Often they don't know about that stuff. And also about the physical environment, thinking about how the external environment affects our behavior and our ability to learn stuff. So teaching kids how to optimize the physical environment. By the way, this project that I'm doing with Wales is about the 14 to 16 curriculum. So they're very keen to make it so that the first curriculum for Wales cohort, currently in year 9, do really well in their GCSEs, basically, even though the whole thing is a 3 to 16 thing, really. And so some of this stuff is around, you know, like study space and revision and stuff. Next, we have the emotional dimension. And this is partly about developing emotional literacy, first of all, just like helping kids to understand their feelings, to be able to express those feelings, either in conversation or maybe writing a journal, and to understand the feelings of others. So naming feelings, essentially, and then developing self-regulation, checking in with how you feel in different situations, learning a wide range of self-regulation techniques, ways in which we can override our nervous systems through some of that stuff I mentioned, through breath work, through getting into your body, through, you know, using mantras and what have you, to overwrite unhelpful thoughts in your mind, finding out what works for you. And so you can see already that even though we can talk about these wedges separately, they're all very interconnected, and physical and emotional are very interconnected. Then we have the behavioral level, and because we're talking about learner effectiveness here, essentially we're talking about habits, helping young people acquire the habits of effective learners, to organize their time effectively, to manage workflow, and to develop systems to sort of just to keep on top of everything, and also to keep unhealthy habits in check if they're prone to procrastination, if they are easily distracted, right? If they're addicted to technology, helping them to keep those unhealthy habits in check. This is the conversation that I've been having with myself for like the last 5 years or so, and I've sort of turned the dial on lots of this stuff. Then we have relational learning, which I mentioned earlier. First of all, relating to yourself, relating to others, and also relating to the world around you, like understanding about, you know, how we fit in the bigger picture. And then the fifth wedge is cognitive. And here we talk, first of all, about understanding cognition, understanding about the brain and how it works and how learning happens and how memory works and what have you, and also developing strategies that help you to learn and develop effectively, to be able to read well, to be able to you know, use effective strategies to learn stuff and to recall information and to transfer that elsewhere. And I often think that when I look at this wheel, it feels a bit like if this was a roulette wheel, schools have just like put all their chips in the red wedge. They've just gone all in on cognition, haven't they? And it's just like content, testing, feedback. It's just all about the cognitive stuff. And of course, that's, you know, you want people to be learning well and to be able to read and to be able to, you know, function effectively cognitively. But if the barriers to learning, if children are not getting enough sleep, or their diet isn't you know, well suited to them, if emotionally they're sort of all over the place and they keep falling out with their friends, whatever it might be, if they're addicted to technology, or if they're, you know, prone to procrastination, all of these ideas, if they're not able to, if they have a negative relationship with themselves, if they beat themselves up all the time, then talking about flashcards and revision techniques, as schools so often do, is not going to help them. And that's the problem that we just see happening every day in every school across the land. So I think that we need to do more to help schools to get out of that cognitive wedge and to develop these other domains. And lastly, we have the navigational domain, which is hence the ship's wheel, where we think about essentially setting a destination and then moving towards it. In regard to any of these other 5 domains, so thinking about where are you in terms of sleep. Let's keep a sleep diary for a week, just like keep it, or whatever, get an app on your phone that monitors how much you sleep. Look at the national guidelines from medics on how much you know, a teenager should sleep, say, and think, right, okay, I need to maybe do something about this. How do people improve their sleep? And so this bit here is sort of specific to the Welsh curriculum. So these are the characteristics that are behind the 4 purposes of the Welsh curriculum, thinking about the kinds of characteristics that we want children and young people to develop. And this is where the change management stuff comes in, thinking about where you are, where you want to be, and how you're going to get from A to B. And so I've been working with this model. And the first thing is to say is that it's just reinforce that point that learner effectiveness is multidimensional, that these 6 domains, as I mentioned, are often interconnected and they're all in play at any one time, whether it's about, you know, friendship stuff or finances or, you know, how tidy your house is. There's probably all kinds of different domains happening all over the place. And of course, we want children and everybody to function optimally at all of these levels. And as I've mentioned a moment ago, you know, we need to get out of that cognitive wedge and help schools to do the same. Developing this is a complex endeavor, and it's dynamic, and different kids require different things, and they require different strategies. And so we need to do a sort of spiral curriculum where we spiral around these different wedges and help people to turn the dial in these different areas of their lives. And we've developed a bunch of strategies, 6 in each domain so far, and there's more to come. Like practical strategies with like a little 1-page explainer for each of them about how to move forward in each of these areas of life. So that's just one area in which I think that we need to diversify the school curriculum. We need to have learner effectiveness on the curriculum, like Derry suggests, 20%, 1 day a week, where we're sort of, it's not all taken up with this sort of stuff, but we address this sort of stuff. We help to develop those learners as individuals. And this work could be quite formal. It could be like, here's a strategy, try it, let's reflect on it next week. Or it could be much looser, and the teacher's just using them to address issues as they arise. But we can also diversify the curriculum much more widely. And I think that the use of nano courses is the answer to the problem that we face there, where you just have electives, right? So like within that block of traditional lessons, you have however many a school is capable of providing under these different areas. There are loads of things that schools don't currently do that they should, or that people, that at least at the very least, that people would be interested in, that children and young people would be interested in. And this list is not at all exhaustive. You know, this is just like you could happily spend, you know, a good while sort of refining this list, and it's really just here as an illustrative thing to say we need to diversify the offer. And you could do that quite easily, I think, by making it not accredited at the level of like, so you wouldn't have to have some exam board who goes around and moderates, the clipboard person comes around and moderates your robotics class and does it meet standard X, Y, and Z. I think that you have teacher set assessments, and that you could have this sort of bottom-up portfolio type assessment thing that would sit around these nano courses, and you could run them at different levels, like beginners, intermediate, more advanced levels. You could drop a course if you try robotics and you don't really like it, and you think, fine, I'm going to try and do something about animals or about survival skills. And if you do like it, then you could stick with it and go to the next level. I would love to see much more of that, both in secondary schools, but also I'm not a primary practitioner, and so I don't know like the extent to which primary colleagues would think that you could do. I think that you could probably do more of this stuff at primary as well, but especially at A levels, like the way in which in this country we just whittle down people's choices. You get 9 subjects when you're age 12. That whittles down. If you go on to do A levels, you can choose 3 subjects. If you go on to university, most people just only do 1 thing or maybe 2 things at university, and that's ludicrous, isn't it? Like just as you're growing up, like, and becoming a young adult, and your experiences are branching off in 100 different directions, and you want to try all these things, and it sort of should branch out like a tree. And the education system is doing the exact opposite of that. It's like this inverted tree that doesn't have very many roots to start with, and then very quickly just like turns into a spike, which is the opposite. So we need to turn that upside down and have more nano courses. And I'll stop sharing here because there's a couple of other bits on this front about diversifying the curriculum. People are talking a lot about oracy at the moment. The Labour government talking a lot about oracy, which I'm a huge advocate for. I've been working in that field for many years. Philosophy for children, philosophical inquiry lessons are wonderful. We could have more of that, more like environmental education, getting kids out into nature, more practical stuff, growing food, fixing things, cooking. There's lots more that we could do within the curriculum that I think would go a long way to addressing the point that Wendy made earlier. And so I'll pause at this point with and just invite some chat. I'm sure that you've all thought about similar things before. I'm not presenting this like the Moses from on high. I'm sure that you've all thought about this as well, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on diversifying the curriculum. And also on the ship's wheel model. I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on that as a way of sort of squaring. I think the ship's wheel sort of squares the circle between like pastoral learning, sort of looking after kids and making sure they're okay, and academic learning. It's like it's all happening within the same kid, and so let's just have a more holistic understanding of what that looks like.
So do feel free to raise hands or show your if you'd like to say something on diversifying the curriculum.
Go on, Derry.
I was going to say, you should never underestimate how much kids can learn from each other and how much they learn from each other. And that if you can get the 20% self-directed day going, the opportunity for kids to learn from each other and discover interests that would never have occurred to them. I think you'd get a pretty wide-ranging offer, James, once you got the self-directed learning rolling. And I'm sure you would have seen some of that in the self-managed college, wouldn't you, in Brighton?
Absolutely, yeah. And in the learner effectiveness program that I ran and evaluated for my PhD, absolutely, there was loads of that. One of the great ones was the Who Am I project, where they just have the kids have 6 weeks to just answer that question, who are you, in as many ways as they can, and then they present to one another, and it's a wonderful way to help kids to learn from one another. And to be something else that I didn't mention in that last section, but that I really should add quickly, is about being your authentic self. Like, lots of kids don't feel like they are welcome in the classroom, that their life, their interests are like, if they're into Minecraft or if they're into whatever it is, 100 different things, that's not like good enough, that they're not able to sort of to be themselves. And that's something that we really need to turn on its head. And what you're talking about, Derry, that peer-to-peer learning is a great way to unleash that. Sophie?
I suppose I think the wheel you shared is great, and I think if that was the curriculum, then awesome. I think I'm unsure why we need a content-based learning model when we're, children are growing into a world where information is at their fingertips. So this idea of instruction to me feels a little bit defunct. If we can support children to understand what they need to know and understand how to pick out fact from fiction and how they best learn and what their brain needs, and if they can plan that journey from navigating from A to B and be supported to navigate that journey in whichever route best suits them, then I find the idea of kind of like a curriculum of all children must know these specific things a bit redundant, I suppose, in 2024, in the future that we're supporting them to access.
I have a response to that, but Richard just had his hand raised, so I'll come back to it. Richard.
Yeah, thanks, James, and generally, but to Sophie as well. That program that I ran, the students were required to fulfill the requirements of the ministry curriculum. So essentially, they weren't in control of what they had to learn, but they had pretty much full control of how they learned it. And there was a mixed age group in there, so we had a lot of that peer learning taking place. When I first began it, I thought I was going to end up doing all kinds of tutoring, that I'd just be basically a teacher all day, but with small group. And as it turned out, the students rarely came to me for help. They found other ways to learn what they had to. And once they had control over how they learned it, they fulfilled those ministry requirements in a fraction of the time that it would take them lockstepping through a regular class with a teacher. And they maintained the same level of grades on it, maybe a little less in some cases, because they thought, well, this isn't important to me. I don't have to spend this much time on that. I'd rather do something else. And they started doing a lot of their own things in that process. So just getting back to James' positive introductory remarks about us not having to throw away so much of what we've acquired, the funds and the resources that are going into public education. We just have to get them being used differently. And so this 20% idea, that semi-school within a school that I ran, what Charlie's doing, these are all great ways that we can begin to, what a video on changing paradigms says, a great way to begin to help the old system die with dignity. In other words, you don't have to bury it. You can nurse it into a better space.
I like that metaphor. Thank you for that. Just very, very briefly, I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but just to respond to your point, Sophie, I think that I sympathize with it to an extent, but I do think that there's a case for instruction, in the sense, so in a couple of senses. One being that just if you choose, like I've just recently started playing volleyball, for example, and I'm having lessons as well as doing free play, and it's really useful to do both of those things. But the lessons are really helpful, and I need instruction. It's like an efficient way to learn. But also the deeper point is that it's like people often say, oh yeah, kids can just Google stuff, but Google is not a reliable narrator of reality, and actually to be able to understand the difference between a correct Google response and an incorrect one, or anything that you find on the internet, you need to have a lot of knowledge about that topic in order to be able to discern whether what you're looking at is true or not. And there's more to say there, but so I do think that there's a case for instruction, but I think that it needs to be reined in. I think that it's like considered to be the only model, and among many traditionalists, anything that deviates from that is like total heresy, and that it's like damaging for disadvantaged children, and it's all very heightened, and that's ridiculous. But I think that there's a case for it.
Can I just respond to that? Sorry, because I 100% agree with you. I'm not anti-teacher at all. I'm a teacher myself. I definitely think there's a role for educators in supporting young people, but even your example of volleyball, I think it was, if the curriculum was one where children can access topics as and when they feel fit, and that they're not necessarily directed from above, but they're chosen by young people, then you're going to see better success rates, and people are going to learn the things at a point in time when they're ready to learn them. And it's not like this kind of like tick box of we have to learn all these things to be a functioning human being. If we focus on that wheel that you presented, then actually children will have a better understanding of the things that they need to learn, and then they access instruction that way, if that makes sense. I think that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, totally. Go on, Derry.
I think it was Wendy who mentioned coercion. Is there ever a case for coercion outside of an emergency situation where perhaps there's a fire and you've got to grab someone and get them out? But there's so much coercion in everyday schooling, James. Is there ever a case for that?
It's a very good question, and I think that I did an episode of the podcast a while ago with this sex education expert, a guy called Johnny Hunt, I believe his name is, and we were talking about consent a lot and the importance of consent within sex education, and lots of very, very concerning patterns of behavior that we're seeing out in the world. Lots of toxic behavior, lots of non-consensual stuff happening, and we were sort of talking about bringing that back to education. And in education, it's essentially a system of coercion, isn't it, where if you're wearing the wrong colored socks or whatever, you've not got the right pen, and you get a detention and you don't go to that detention, then you get another detention, you get a Saturday detention, it gets escalated until you yield to the authority of the teacher. And essentially you're learning the lesson that if you're able to convince people to do what you want them to do, that's the way the world works. And it's they get one lesson on consent in PSHE, and then they get 1 million lessons, or however it is, 10,000 lessons, which is all about like, you do as you're told, and this is a non-consensual situation. And so absolutely, I share that deep concern, that lack of consent, or the coercion, is deeply, deeply problematic, and it is creating many of the problems that we're seeing in the world. Yeah, I agree with that. Let's go Richard and then Jack.
A little story from Sudbury Valley School that Daniel Greenberg told. It was of a group of 10 or 12 children, ages 10 to 12 roughly, came to him asking if he would give them a course in math. And Daniel Greenberg, as you would expect him to say, why would you want a course in math? But the kids convinced him that they wanted it. And so he established some conditions there that, well, if I'm to plan a course for you, you have to commit to attending. And they decided how many classes and at what time, and they committed, and they would do the homework, and they would pay attention in class. And he found that within 20 hours, the students learned all of the math that is imposed on them from kindergarten to the end of grade 6, learned it all in an average of 20 hours. The course ran more than once. And so that's where the idea of having a curriculum can help. There are things where if you have a student who comes to you and has a clear goal in mind, then a course can do like the volleyball did, give you the progression that you would need to follow in order to best accomplish that learning goal. So definitely a place for courses and teachers still who can deliver curriculum nicely.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for that. Jack?
Yeah, a bit of a small scale comment to make. I really like the idea of the nano courses. There are tons of times as a teacher where I'm reading about something and I'm like, wow, I personally would love to really get into this, for just spend a couple of days just going hard on this. And I'm sure that the kids would feel similarly, or some of them would. As a science teacher, I really empathized with your, just pouring knowledge onto students who don't care and feel bad for not getting it. And then coupled with that, there are occasions where, like, microscopy, for instance, was something that the students like really got into. We do a lesson with microscopes, and they'd say, "Sir, can we stay behind at lunch and spend more time looking at the microscopes?" And to be able to, you know, whether it was a micro course or nano course or one of, you know, Derry's 20% days, to be able to give them that opportunity, I think it would empower so many more students, at least in science specifically, to find their interest in it and not just have to sit and have the facts wash over them.
Yeah,
so.
absolutely. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. James, I was just going to say, there's Andy is said in the chat he'd like to say something as well.
Oh, right. Yeah,
I just
please
raised my
Andy.
hand actually just to say that, so I'll put my hand down.
Are you there, Andy?
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry. Hi. Sorry, I just went to the door and then it went quiet, so I'm guessing we'll let you speak. Sorry. Hello. As I ran out the stairs, so I'm really out of breath. I think my thoughts on curriculum. I think one thing I think a lot about is that learning things that you aren't interested in is so difficult. Like, I remember when I was at uni, my interest was learning about things like autism and ADHD. We had one lecture on it. I had to write an assignment on whether or not horizontal or vertical lines make you look fatter or thinner. That was 20% of my grade for the year. And I just thought, what are we doing here? And I couldn't do it until the night before because it was so stressful. But I think for me, having teachers and people who are able to sort of help you do what you'd like to is really important. But I think it's also really important to follow people's self-direction, because when you're interested in something, you do a better job at it. I guess the other thing I think a lot about is having a curriculum assumes that you know what's best for someone. And I think a lot about when, like, computer science started to become more used, when actually, if you look at things at the moment, AI is becoming more and more popular. That I was with a young person today and we programmed a robots game together using AI to see how it works. So then the stuff people learned when they were in school isn't actually needed or relevant anymore. So it assumes you know best when they might not be in line with your interests. And yeah, there's other ways to do it too. But final thing I wanted to mention, that's okay, and I'll shut up, I'm very sorry. So when I was at school, I got the best GCSEs in my school and I got 100% in like most of my exams. But then the one thing which enabled me to do what I needed to set up the charity that I run now was my own self-directed learning out of school. And not a single thing I learned in school was actually relevant to what I actually do now, which is also really interesting. But yeah.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Can I just share one more thing? I've got about another 5 minutes to share. How is that okay time wise, Alex and Joe? We're allowed to go on a little bit. So it actually links back to this coercion thing. So this is the third of the big ideas that I wanted to talk about: diversification at the level of schools, diversification of the curriculum. Then the third one is diversification. So there's this whole talks about agency and choice at the level of decision making. So I've been doing this really interesting work for the last few years. As I mentioned at the start of this conversation, this conference on implementation science that I went to many years ago, which just blew me away. And one of the key ideas that I've been working with in schools all over the world now is this idea of slice teams. So often, like, everybody knows that, like, almost all change, like, school improvement initiatives don't actually improve outcomes for kids, even fleetingly, let alone like in any lasting sort of meaningful way. And that's largely, I think, because we just default to top-down decision making all the time. The small number at the top of the organization, not just in schools, but it's the water that we swim in, isn't it? Governments and hospitals and businesses, wherever, the charity sector, there's usually a small number of chiefs and a whole bunch of other people. And for a whole range of reasons, that leads to bad decision making. You get groupthink, you get this us and them sort of dynamic. The decisions are often made in a closed room behind closed doors, so people don't feel like they're party to it. That whole thing about not liking what you're when anything that you're told to do. And as an alternative to that, we use a slice team where you take a cross section through an organization and you get representatives of different types of people sitting around the decision-making table together, not just as a consultation exercise, but actually making the decisions. And that group becomes like the executive that's tasked with overseeing. Let's say it's about literacy. Then you get, you know, an early career teacher, the SENCO or ALNCO in Wales, the middle leader, a senior leader, kids, parents from different year groups of different types of kids, all sitting around a table together, making decisions about how to improve literacy or feedback or attendance or whatever it could be, science provision, 100 things you could look at. And it's really interesting. It's so effective. Number one, you get much better decision making because you're looking at it through all of those different lenses. You're thinking about this from the perspective of the trainee, of the teaching assistant, of the year 6 pupil, of the parent, and what have you. But also you get buy-in like never before. People across the whole school community know that they're represented at that decision-making table, and they come with you on the journey, and you unleash all of this like goodwill and like the desire for people to actually co-own this thing and to make smart decisions at the point of use. And that's just like, that's one of these ideas that I've been working with. There are many of them, and I'll just finish by sharing my screen. There's a couple of slides to share. One is the inevitable book plug. So this book is the product of this 10 years of research and development. It's coming out in January. Really, really proud of this thing. It's taken a lot out of me to pull all of this together, pulling together ideas from healthcare, from business, from politics, from engineering, from wherever, and creating this like a practical guide to help implement school improvement. And this book's aimed at school leaders, but I really think that those of us who are interested in system level reform, lots of the ideas in this book are really relevant for just like how to implement change, how to bring about the change that we want to see, practical frameworks for change. So it's out in January, but I'm told that you can pre-order it on Amazon. I've not seen that myself yet, but somebody said that they'd done that. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to grab yourself a copy. So the slice team is the main idea in there, but there's lots and lots of other ideas. And finally, I'd like to end on another plug, really, or just to sort of to bring your attention to a little initiative that I've been working with for the last year or so, the Education Policy Alliance, which is really in its very early stages, and it's essentially taking that slice team approach and using it to like crowdsource education policy. That we can then start to try to build relationships with policymakers and say, you know, here are some really good ideas. We did a report on Ofsted earlier this year, and like it was called A Vision for a New Accountability System for Schools. We've just written a new one, which is about creating a culture of well-being in schools. Borrowing Andrew Spate is a member of this group who I know gave the talk on Monday evening, who's an absolute force of nature. And so we've got this sort of one-page screen grab, and we're about to publish this report on creating a culture of well-being in schools. What do we want to achieve? Where are we now? How can we do this? And we've got these 10, we're sort of calling them suggestions rather than recommendations, 10 suggestions for how we go about creating schools that prioritize mental health and well-being, why we need to change, and so on. And so if anybody's interested in either that particular report, but also potentially just like getting involved with this group, people tend to sort of come and go. Sometimes people are sort of quite into it and they come to a few meetings and then, you know, something takes off in their life and then they fall into the background. And so we're always looking for new people to come along. So I'll stick the contact form in the chat box. And if anybody's interested in this internationally as well, we're not just looking at, looking for UK-based people. If you want to drop me a line through that contact form and just let me know who you are, and if you're interested in potentially, you know, getting involved, we're thinking of putting on an event. Dare I say it? What am I saying? Thinking of putting on an event, but it's more like an unconference, right? So more like what we've been doing tonight, but with less of me. I want to have a conference with no speakers where we all come together and take that slice team and multiply it up to like 250 people in a room sitting around just like thinking about how to solve the problems that we face, working through some of these change tools so that at the end of the day we actually have like a rudimentary plan for how to bring about the change that we want to see. So yes, please do get in touch. Thank you for the encouragement there, Wendy. I will count on your support. So thank you again, Alex and Joe, and thank you to everybody who's been watching and listening and contributing. Really appreciate this. I've very much enjoyed it.
Thank you, James. It was fantastic, and I really loved hearing everyone else's views and opinions as well. So that was a nice little addition to your session. I have got a few questions coming through on the chat, so I'll ask them of you, and you can answer. So the first one actually comes through from Wendy, who says, to what extent do we have the time and space to be able to consider what and how we learn, and the level to which we're socially conditioned to simply follow what has always just been done? So I think this is maybe a question about, you know, we're living our very busy lives, and we're often, you know, we're doing one thing after another. How do we take that break back to go, oh, hang on, do I want to do things differently? Or you think you've managed to mute yourself?
Thank you for that. It's a great question, Wendy. So yeah, I mean, time is the most precious resource of all, isn't it? Even more so than money. Like just having the time. For me personally, I think that the way forward with this is to have a weekly review. I've found this so beneficial for me personally, and for people that I know, and also in the schools that I work with. So like going back to that the ship's wheel model. So you have like a weekly check-in, and it's on your calendar. It's like it's like sacrosanct time, like an hour a week. It's a really good idea to find a person, like a buddy, that you're going to have like to be your accountability partner. And just sort of just reflect on that ship's wheel. There are other versions of it. You know, there are other things that you could put in that wedge. You could have a moral, ethical wedge. You could have a spiritual wedge. You know, there are other, how you could have like how tidy your house is wedge, or whatever it might be. You could have all kinds of different things that you look at, and just pick one. Just pick one that takes your fancy, and just talk it through and think, oh, like, yeah, this is an area of my life where I don't really feel like I'm where I want to be. And so here's a plan. Like, let's just talk it through. What could I do between now and next week to turn the dial on that thing? And then the following week, it's like this Janus-faced approach that it becomes, where you sort of, first of all, you look back and you sort of say, okay, so what did I say that I would do last week? How did that go? And you know, what went well? What did I find difficult? Did I run out of time this week? Did I just completely forget about it? And therefore, what do I need to do differently this week? And then looking ahead to the week ahead, is there anything coming down the track that you want to think about or to learn about? And so, and essentially, like, for all of the research that I've done over the years in metacognition and self-regulation, it really boils down to these two things: monitor and control. It's just like check in and take action, check in, take action, and that's it. It's just like, I think of it as like a sort of little infinity loop. You just like reflect on stuff, try stuff, reflect on stuff, try stuff, and you just weave your way through like that. So that would be my answer to that. Like, we don't have the time often, but just, yeah, carving out an hour a week can really free you up to do all kinds of cool stuff. And and I love that, the way that you phrase that, where you say to overcome your conditioning, because that's what that does. Like, metacognition, I think, is the beginning of freedom. It's like that is the escape hatch. That 1 hour a week is the escape hatch through which you pop out of your habitual ways, and you just like survey the scene and figure out what you want to turn the dial on.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. Funny enough, I feel like I started that process when I had counselling when I was in university, and it was like suddenly I realised that my brain could change, and I hadn't considered that before. I know that sounds weird, being, you know, having gone through the school system, and you think, well, you know, you're learning all the time, but I had this sudden realisation that, oh, you know, there's all these elements of my life that might change, and I might be able to actually choose to change them, and that's something that I can do for myself and choose the direction I'm going in. So yeah, really interesting. So Andy has a question, and I think, as Joe put in the chat, please do feel free, if you have questions for Jane, pop them in the chat, or if you've just got something that you'd like to just say that's really interesting. Question from Andy then, who says, you've met and listened to so many people, but who has been the most impactful on you in terms of your views on education and what the future should look like?
Really interesting. I mean, that's a very, very hard question to answer, because there are so many people who bring so many like really important perspectives. It would be difficult to choose a favorite, but there is one name that stands out. When I read that, and I mentioned him earlier, Tim Brighouse, who sadly died last year. And I really recommend, by the way, that book that I mentioned, Unfinished Business, The Life and Legacy of Sir Tim Brighouse, a tribute and a call to action. Tim was a remarkable figure, like truly remarkable for all kinds of reasons. Very smart, very accomplished, and just really relatable. And he had these qualities that are just like really rare, where he made people feel really special, really seen and heard and understood. He was always like writing little letters and notes to people and just making them feel like they were the center of the universe. And not only did he do that, and he was just like a nice guy, but he just achieved unbelievable things in the work that he did as the chief education officer in Birmingham, and latterly with the London Challenge. Like the London Challenge was phenomenal, where they had this 10-year initiative to improve the outcomes among London schools. And one of the things that he did was partly about language, where he sort of like the schools that most needed to improve, whereas Ofsted would call them whatever their new scale is going to be, or like inadequate or woeful or something ludicrous. He called them keys to success, because that's what they were. He was like, they're the keys to success. Like if they don't improve, then we're not going to raise the floor. So they are the keys. And so just by using that sort of more positive, inclusive language, and the results of the London Challenge were absolutely phenomenal. And so so Tim, he was a very, very broad guy, but I really like him because he not only sort of was really interesting and said lots of interesting things, but he made really like profound improvements to people's lives within the system as it currently exists, which is just super impressive. So so Tim, I think, sets the bar for like what I would aspire to achieve as an education reformer.
Fantastic. I actually have not read the book yet, and I've heard so many people mention it, so it is 100% going on my book list or my bookshelf, which is just in front of me here. Okay, Sylvie asks in the chat, how many young people have been involved in the Education Policy Alliance project, if any?
Yes. How many would be there's a steering group on the website, and you can, as I'm looking at it now, so youth representatives, we have Yumna, who was going to talk earlier this week, but she lost her voice, did she? 1, 2, 3, 4, so 4 currently, out of I think about sort of 15 people who are on the website. So I would like there to be more youth representatives. I think that the kids have got like it's absolutely amazing how sophisticated kids are, and how much they just get the nature of the problem, the scale of the problem, they appropriate the language. Like it's sometimes we need to get out of the way and let the kids in. So I'm very keen to bring more young people into that group. I think working with under 16s is difficult, just like in terms of just like parental consent and safeguarding. I think it's just become more complicated, which is a shame, because I have done. We used to do these campfire conversations where we get kids sitting around the campfires around essentially a Zoom call like this, and we'd stick it on YouTube. but yeah, I want to do more of that. So, and if you have any young people in mind who you think would be good to get involved in the EPA, please drop me a line.
Excellent. That sounds great. And such a great thing for them. Like, that's going to give them so many learning opportunities, right, to get involved in something like that. I actually had a question I wanted to ask that came up. So I was looking at your wheel, the wheel analogy, and thinking
Yes.
about all those different elements in it. And I know this is something that's come up in discussion that I've had with people before, is like, what do we see as the role of schools? Like, there's some people that say that school responsibilities stop somewhere, and then it becomes the responsibilities of
Yeah.
the family to kind of pick up where school stops almost. But how important do you think it is that actually the schools do and get involved in that whole person development?
Super, 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 super important. Like, it's I always really despair when people sort of say that it's like the like, oh, it's overreach, and that, like, that should be parents who do that sort of thing. Just because, like, it's you're like washing your hands of the problem, right? You're just sort of saying, well, that's not our responsibility. We just need to teach geography, and, like, yeah, all that stuff about mindfulness and meditation, just hippie nonsense. And just, like, yeah, just, if their parents are into that, like, that to me is just, it's not taking the problem seriously enough. And I think that, like, rather than sort of doing parents' jobs for them, I think that we should be thinking, like, how can we reach out to parents and get them to be more engaged in education? Like, quite often there's like intergenerational, just total disconnection from school that runs through families. They see their time in the school day almost as like a little mini prison sentence that they sort of need to see out, and then they just do their time, and then there's almost like a weird pride in that. And it's just like, we need to build bridges between schools and families, and not just sort of say, no, that's over to you. I can sort of, I get it to some extent. I understand the critique that sometimes schools are asked to do too much. And there was, what was the recent thing that the Labour Party was saying, that they were going to have teeth brushing lessons and so on, and they're like, oh, well, that's ridiculous. But equally, like, if tooth decay is a really bad thing, then why not do that? I don't see the problem with it.
Yeah, I suppose it's whatever. It's going back to what's important to each individual learner again, isn't it?
Right.
What do they actually need to learn in that moment?
Yeah. Go on, Derry.
I was just going to say, tomorrow, James, I'm going to the 21st birthday party of an organisation called COPS, which is the Council of Portsmouth School Students.
Oh, yeah.
And it met for the first time 21 years ago tomorrow. And it's developed. The kids who come through COPS don't want to give up, and they've started a business called Unlock, which now employs 10 people. And they kind of sell programs, not just to educational institutions, but to companies, quite big companies as well, and not just in the UK, but internationally. And they've been in touch with Andrew Spate, and I'm really hoping they'll get involved with your Educational Policy Alliance, James. And I'm going to mention it at the COP's 21st birthday party tomorrow.
Oh, great. Thank you. That's good to hear. Yeah, it's very cool. I remember you telling me about that Portsmouth initiative before. It's amazing. Yeah. And so, but just quickly to come back to the ship's wheel thing. One thing that I find really interesting is that, like, if you listen to all these podcasts about, like, productivity and things, and people like Tim Ferriss, who, like, interviews all these, like, super successful people, actors and whatever, artists and whatever, investors and things like that, they're all, like, super into, like, meditation and journaling and breath work and stuff like that. Like, that's the stuff that effective people do. They understand how to use everything at their disposal, and there's nothing on that wheel, I don't think, that's like that would be justifiably, framed as overreach. Like, teaching kids how to be in their bodies, the importance of sleep, diet, nutrition, emotional regulation, Like if they're not getting that at home and schools are washing their hands of it, then they're going to find it really difficult to learn that by themselves. And so yeah, I don't take that critique too seriously, although I do sort of understand where it comes from.
And also I feel like we're also applying a really school-based mindset to that, because I feel like most people would think, well, where am I going to find the time to teach that in a class?
Yeah.
And of course that doesn't have to be what it is. It can be as you say, like it can be a 5-minute meditation before assembly in the morning or something. You know, it's not having to be didactic teaching.
Well, you give them choices. So like this program that I've been developing with the Welsh government, I showed that slide with the 36 strategies on earlier, and it's like, pick one. Like which of these areas do you want to work on this week? And you don't have to sort of stick with the same thing all the time. And yeah, one size fits all is just often a bad idea. And like the thing that you just said about let's all do a meditation for 5 minutes, for some people meditation is like cool, that's their comfort zone. For other people, they're really freaked out by it and they don't like it, and they don't like the quietness. It makes them feel anxious and panicky. And so don't make them do that. If for them, like, you know, being an animal and like crawling around on their hands and knees and doing whatever is the way that they can get into their body to sort of to regulate, you know, then let them do that instead. So you want to you want to give people choice.
Choice is the key.
Choice.